Welcome. Come in. Close the door behind you. Make yourself comfortable. And listen closely. Now tell me, are you happy? Don't answer right away. Don't say what you want to believe. Don't give the answer you'd tell others. Ask yourself, truly, deep within, are you happy, or just surviving? In a corner of the world, where elevators play music no one hears, and people check their reflections only to make sure they look okay, there was a man named Gabriel. He wasn't special. He didn't have an impressive number of followers, hadn't run marathons, hadn't saved anyone from a fire. But he had a flawless routine, a neatly ironed shirt, a socially acceptable smile, and the refined art of answering all good, while falling apart inside with the precision of a surgeon. One Thursday, after a meeting where they thanked him for his great contribution before asking him to hand over his access badge, Gabriel walked down the building stairs as if descending within himself. Halfway down, he thought of his life as if it were a spreadsheet. Everything tidy, everything recorded, everything without a soul. He walked to a supermarket, not because he needed anything, but because he needed to look like someone who does things. He wandered through the aisles without really looking, picked up a box of cereal, then put it back, stood in front of the deli section with the vacant stare of someone who hasn't asked himself what he truly enjoys in years. And then he saw a child. He was about 7 years old, with a ridiculous bow on his head and dressed as a dinosaur. He roared while pushing a toy cart. His mother, exhausted, tried to convince him not to bite the air. The boy, unstoppable, roared, spun around, leapt about as if the entire supermarket was his jungle. Gabriel watched him, and for the first time in a long time, he smiled genuinely. The boy stopped, looked at him, walked over, and without warning he said, "You look like a sad tree." It wasn't cruel. He said it like someone stating a fact, like someone observing an object and describing it plainly. A sad tree. Then he ran off, still roaring. Gabriel wasn't offended. He didn't laugh either. He just stood there, felt something he didn't know how to name, saw himself from the outside, a tree that had forgotten how to bloom, one that gave shade, but no fruit, one that was alive, but only in biological terms. That night, he didn't write in a journal, didn't have an epiphany, didn't change his life. He simply got home, took off his shoes, looked at his reflection in the microwave, and said aloud, "I am a sad tree." And for the first time, he listened to himself. There is nothing more powerful than looking at yourself with honesty, without drama. Nothing braver than recognizing you've forgotten how to celebrate yourself. Because yes, maybe you have a job, a partner, children, or a list of accomplishments that sound great at a dinner party. But when was the last time you congratulated yourself for not giving up? When was the last time you thanked yourself for pushing forward despite everything? Maybe this book found you by chance. Maybe someone recommended it. Maybe you stumbled upon it one night while searching for something else. But here you are. And if you're here, it's not because you need to be taught something. It's because there's something inside you that already knows this. It just needed someone to say it out loud. With art, with rawness, with beauty, with the sad laughter of someone who's cried so much they've learned to laugh differently. You won't find formulas here. There are no lists, no commandments. This isn't a self-help audiobook. It's a mirror with humor, a glass of wine to drink alone, a hug laced with sarcasm, a conversation that doesn't try to fix you, just gives you permission to celebrate yourself as you are. It doesn't matter if you're listening to this with tired eyes, on the bus, in the kitchen, in the middle of a day that feels far from epic. What matters is that your ears are open, and when the ears open, the soul begins to breathe differently. What you're about to hear isn't a lesson. It's a journey. We won't give you a map. We'll give you a new music to walk differently. Let's begin. Chapter 1. The loneliness behind the applause. There is an uncomfortable truth no one dares to say aloud. Most people don't celebrate being alive. They merely endure their existence. It's strange how humanity developed this habit of living without ever applauding life, without honoring itself, without raising a glass, without acknowledging that being here is, in itself, an extraordinary feat. Who taught us this? Who convinced us that we had to earn the right to enjoy our own existence? That we needed to deserve what is already ours simply by being born? You probably don't even remember, because it happened in a way as natural as it was cruel. Slowly, with a disapproving glance in childhood, with a comment that wounded your joy without meaning to, with constant pressure to do better, to be better, to prove you were worth something. No one teaches us how to celebrate life, even though living it is already a heroic act. If you think about it calmly, existence isn't exactly easy. In fact, the fact that you're here, breathing right now, is an absolutely improbable event. Thousands of generations had to meet, fall in love, suffer, endure, make mistakes, and find their way, just so you could be here, in this very moment, listening to these words. Life, seen this way, is nothing short of a constant miracle, an infinite accumulation of chances and choices that brought you to this exact point in time. And yet, no one has ever congratulated you for this. No one has ever said, "Congratulations, you made it. You're alive." We live trapped in the strange habit of demanding from ourselves, correcting ourselves, punishing ourselves for everything. No one taught us the radical importance of pausing, taking a deep breath, looking around, and applauding ourselves simply for still being here. For some twisted reason, we believe that self-congratulation is something we only deserve after achieving something extraordinary, something worthy of external praise. But being here, breathing, enduring, getting up every morning to face the unknown, isn't that already extraordinary enough? In a quiet corner of the beautiful city of Toledo, Spain, Julián, a 40-year-old man, a university professor, father of 2 daughters, was staring at the ceiling at 3:40 in the morning. His wife lay peacefully asleep beside him. Julián, of course, was not. He couldn't sleep because his mind was replaying over and over the same scene, a 20-minute presentation he had given earlier that day to the board of directors at his university. He had felt nervous, a bit clumsy, uncertain in some parts, even though everyone told him afterward that he'd done well, that his ideas had come across clearly. Julián couldn't accept their praise. He felt like a fraud, convinced that his colleagues were just trying to comfort him out of pity. Julián had never congratulated himself in his entire life. If someone asked how he felt after achieving something, he would answer with an awkward smile, "I could have done better." In the darkness of his room, the weight of that chronic self-criticism felt like an invisible ton on his chest. At that same hour, on a street across town, Clara, a 36-year-old nurse, was smoking a cigarette by the back door of the hospital where she worked night shifts. She stared at the starry sky, her bones aching with exhaustion from another endless shift. She had treated critical patients, endured arrogant doctors, and comforted desperate families. Yet there she stood, breathing in cold air mixed with smoke, wondering if all her effort meant anything at all. Clara had also never been taught that she deserved applause for just being there, awake, enduring, pouring out energy she wasn't even sure she could replenish. For her, all of it was simply her job. Something ordinary, something not worthy of any recognition. Julián's life and Clara's life were very different on the surface, yet they shared the exact same emotional wound, a complete inability to celebrate themselves. And that was the true human tragedy. They had learned how to survive, yes, but not how to live. Because living, simple as it sounds, means standing in front of the mirror at night, looking yourself in the eye, and sincerely saying, "You did well. You're still here. Thank you for holding on." You know what the strangest paradox is? That we have ceremonies and celebrations for almost everything: birthdays, weddings, college graduations, professional awards, anniversaries. We even celebrate job promotions and any external achievement that others recognize. But there isn't a single daily ceremony where you tell yourself, "Congratulations for holding on, for not giving up, for keeping on walking even if no one sees the effort it takes." The irony is that, if you really think about it, the celebrations we need the most are precisely the ones that never come, the ones no one announces. Because when you're facing yourself, your doubts, your daily fears, there's no diploma, no title. When you're confronting your silent failures, bearing the weight of other people's expectations, surviving social pressure, there is no official ceremony. And yet, those small daily acts of quiet resilience are the true triumphs of your life. But when they go unrecognized, something inside you slowly begins to dim, like a forgotten candle left burning in the dark. Have you heard the story of the man who searched for his lost cat in the middle of the night? A neighbor saw him looking under a street lamp and came to help. After a long while of not finding anything, the neighbor, confused, asked, "Are you sure the cat got lost here, under this light?" The man calmly replied, "No, my cat was lost somewhere back there in the darkness, but this is where the light is, so it's easier to look here." That's exactly how we live, searching for recognition, for happiness, for meaning, in the places where it seems easiest to find them, in the artificial lights others have hung above our heads. But the real joy, the true recognition, got lost in that darkness we're too afraid to explore, the darkness of self-acceptance, of private celebration, of the silence it takes to recognize ourselves without anyone else's applause. So when will you stop and look in the right place? When will you stop waiting for some external spotlight to show you what's been glowing inside you all along? You don't have to wait for someone else to clap. You deserve that applause here and now, simply for being alive, for breathing, for waking up each day and standing in front of your own insecurities. You deserve to be congratulated for your invisible resilience, for the small secret victories that no one sees, but that are the very reason you're still standing. This is the truth you forgot, the truth we all forget. Life didn't come with instructions, but it came with a soul that's begging you to celebrate it, to celebrate yourself, if only from time to time. Because if you don't celebrate yourself, who will? In a quiet corner of the world, where few stop to look with honesty, there's a story you won't find in any self-help manual or motivational seminar. Esteban was 38, with a receding hairline, a respectable bank account, and a near-professional ability to feel nothing about anything. He worked for an international logistics company where emails were written in English even though everyone spoke Spanish, where birthdays were celebrated with soulless cupcakes, and promotions felt more like paperwork than glory. Esteban didn't have dramatic problems, but he didn't have passions either. He lived in a state of emotional neutrality that would have made even a bored Buddhist weep with envy. One afternoon, as he sipped his instant coffee with the vacant look of someone who hasn't asked themselves why in years, he got an unexpected message. It was from his mother. It read simply, "When was the last time you laughed really hard, son?" Esteban frowned, not because he was offended, but because he didn't know the answer. He spent the rest of the day trying to remember a real laugh, not one of those polite ones you give in meetings, not the social chuckles you release when someone tells a forced joke. A genuine laugh, visceral, uncontrolled. He couldn't remember a single one. And the most unsettling part wasn't that. It was what he thought afterward. What if laughing like that is something that no longer happens to me? What if that belonged only to my youth? That night, he couldn't sleep, not because of philosophy or existential angst, but because of a far more dangerous thought. Maybe I've forgotten what it feels like to be alive. And that's when it happened, as if the universe had a sense of irony. Esteban slipped in the shower, not dramatically, just enough to slam his hip and end up naked, stunned, curled up in fetal position, while warm water kept falling as if none of it mattered. He didn't break anything. He didn't lose consciousness. He just lay there, with a red but a bruised ego, and a sentence he couldn't help but mutter aloud. "This is so pathetic." And then he laughed. He laughed hard. He laughed with tears. He laughed because the absurdity was too perfect, because after years of performing professionalism, efficiency, and maturity, here he was, on the floor, naked, vulnerable, ridiculous. And right there, on that wet bathroom floor, with no medals and no audience, he finally felt something. It was as if he'd broken out of an invisible prison, as if his body suddenly remembered it had been numb for far too long, not from tragedy, but from the lukewarm monotony of a functional life that forgot how to celebrate itself. And that night, sitting on his bed with an ice pack on his hip and a smile he hadn't worn in years, Esteban did something that wasn't on any productivity list. He congratulated himself, not for falling, but for laughing, for feeling human, for finding himself, if only for a moment, in the middle of a perfectly ridiculous mess. Because isn't that, too, a way to celebrate life? Realizing you're alive not when everything is in order, but when everything is in chaos, and you can still laugh. And here's the truth no one teaches you. Celebration is not a result, it's a perspective. You don't celebrate because things went well. You celebrate because you still feel. Because you can still be lying ridiculously on the floor and feel gratitude that your soul is intact. Society teaches you to celebrate when you win. But no one teaches you to celebrate when you've saved yourself from your pressure, from your mask, from your role. Esteban got it right there, with a crooked towel and a sore hip. The real party begins when you stop taking yourself so seriously. And no, it's not a lack of depth. It's an abundance of soul. Joy is an evasion. It's emotional intelligence in its most honest form. That's why the greatest spiritual teachers in history laughed. Buddha, that enlightened figure we imagine in eternal silence, laughed at everything. Osho once said, "Humor is the highest form of spirituality because it's the only language that doesn't require explanation." Jesus never did stand-up comedy, but he knew the irony of the human soul better than anyone. "They don't know what they're doing," he said, through nails and thorns, not as a victim, but as a master of brutal tenderness. And you, when was the last time you laughed out loud and said, "Damn, it's beautiful to be alive"? Do you really need everything to be perfect in order to celebrate yourself? Can't you see that joy is the only thing keeping you sane in a world that thrives on drama? Look around you. Look within. You're here. There's no war you haven't fought. No fall you haven't risen from bearing honorable scars. Not a single day has passed without you performing an elegant act of resistance. And yet, you don't applaud yourself. You know what? It's time. Not tomorrow. Not when your boss acknowledges you. Not when your ex calls. Not when the book is published, the diet completed, the debt paid, the meditation retreat in Thailand is done, or you've learned to bake gluten-free bread. Right now. Exactly now. Congratulate yourself. Laugh at yourself. Laugh for yourself. Laugh even if no one understands why. Because if you don't do it, you'll keep waiting for an ovation that doesn't even know how to pronounce your name. And life didn't come to explain itself. It came to laugh with you. And if you don't learn to celebrate that, then you're not really alive. You're just on standby. And you didn't come here to wait. You came to catch fire. And that, sister of light, brother on the path, is reason enough to applaud yourself until your soul trembles. Think about this. When you were a child, every small achievement was a major event. The first time you walked, the moment you managed to ride a bike without falling, when you learned to tie your shoes by yourself. Those moments brought pure joy, radiant emotion that didn't ask for permission to celebrate. No one had to tell you it mattered. You knew it intuitively. You celebrated it freely. But somewhere along the way, in a forgotten corner of time, you learned to silence that inner voice that rejoiced in your own being. You were taught to feel ashamed for being too happy, to distrust simple joy, to suppress spontaneous pride. Little by little, you internalized the belief that celebrating without a good reason was strange, inappropriate, even suspicious. That voice inside you, which should have stayed by your side like a friend, slowly morphed into an unbearable critic. It no longer congratulates you when you accomplish something, no matter how big or small. It only points out what's missing, what could have been better, what you haven't yet achieved. And so life ceases to be an open field of opportunity and becomes an endless endurance test against your own mind. That is perhaps the greatest tragedy of everyday life, being alive and not really knowing it. It's ironic and profoundly human, because as children we instinctively recognize what's essential. But as adults, we need books, gurus, and therapy to remember the basics, that life, in and of itself, deserves a celebration just for being breathed. Gabriel Garcia Marquez once confessed something in a little-known interview that deeply unsettled even his most devoted admirers. "I wrote 100 Years of Solitude," he said, "and still felt it wasn't enough. I won the Nobel Prize and doubted whether I truly deserved it. My whole life I felt like I was fooling people." There he was, one of the most celebrated, beloved writers on earth, feeling like an imposter in the face of his own achievements, unable to inwardly acknowledge the value of what he had created. And if this could happen to a genius who reached the pinnacle of global recognition, what hope do we, ordinary mortals, have? Those of us who may never win a Nobel, but fight our own small battles every single day. The truth, as painful as it may be, is that all of us are Gabriel Garcia Marquez in one way or another. We've all lived that cruel moment when, after accomplishing something meaningful, we feel like the success isn't really ours, that it was just luck, or that we somehow don't deserve it. We've all experienced, at least once, that uncomfortable suspicion that sooner or later, someone will find out we're not as good as we seem. This feeling is far more common than we think. Psychologists call it imposter syndrome. But maybe it's more honest to call it what it really is: chronic inability to celebrate ourselves. Because deep down, what's missing isn't talent or capacity. It's the internal permission to sincerely applaud who we are and what we do. In 2007, Joshua Bell, one of the world's most celebrated and respected violinists, walked into the Washington, D.C. metro dressed in everyday clothes. No one recognized him. He pulled a Stradivarius worth over $3 million from a worn case, lifted his bow, and began to play, with complete passion, some of the most sublime melodies Bach ever wrote. Amid the rush, surrounded by hurried footsteps and loudspeaker announcements, Joshua Bell, the man whose concert tickets could cost hundreds of dollars, played for free to a crowd that neither saw him nor heard him. A few people stopped briefly. A couple of children stared in fascination, but their parents, too hurried to notice the extraordinary, pulled them away. When he finished, Joshua collected the handful of coins he had received and put away his violin with the calm of someone who understands something profound. The issue wasn't his talent. It wasn't the music. It wasn't even the priceless instrument. The real issue was perception. How many wonders pass unnoticed right before us because we don't know how to see? How many everyday miracles do we ignore simply because we've trained ourselves to recognize only what looks important? That day, Joshua wasn't ignored for lack of genius or beauty. He was ignored because he wasn't standing in a place where people expected to find the extraordinary. We live our lives searching for greatness in obvious places, expecting importance to be wrapped in flashing lights, missing the fact that what truly matters rarely announces itself. In that indifference, in that inability to perceive, lies the real human drama. It's not that miracles don't exist. It's that we've lost the capacity to notice them. It's not that our lives lack beauty. It's that we've grown used to looking for it in the wrong places. We're blinded by what we expect to see, without ever stopping to ask whether what we're seeing is real, or just the echo of what we've been conditioned to believe. This inability to celebrate life is not just cruel, it's absurd. Imagine yourself at a breathtaking concert, where every instrument is perfectly tuned. The music is sublime, the atmosphere magical, the moment deeply moving, and instead of enjoying it, you spend the whole night analyzing whether the second violinist hit a wrong note somewhere in the background. Ridiculous, right? And yet, that's exactly how most of us live. Obsessed with minor flaws, we miss the wonder of the unique, unrepeatable performance we're witnessing, our own life. Now, this doesn't mean you should settle or become complacent. Don't confuse celebration with mediocrity. Celebrating yourself doesn't mean you stop growing. On the contrary, it means recognizing every step you take, every effort you make, every breath you draw as a victory worthy of respect. Celebrating your life is realizing that you're achieving far more than you give yourself credit for, that your presence alone is reason enough to applaud. Do you know who really understood this? Keith Haring, the New York street artist who painted on dirty subway walls and abandoned buildings. When someone asked him if he ever felt frustrated that his works were so ephemeral, so easily erased, he smiled mischievously and said, "Everything is ephemeral. I just celebrate that I get to paint today, because tomorrow, who knows?" The deep simplicity of that answer hides a forgotten truth. Life can't be saved, stored, or postponed. It is celebrated now, or it is lost forever. Perhaps you've never thought of celebration as something profoundly rebellious, but it is. To celebrate your everyday existence, to be joyful without external permission, to congratulate yourself even if no one else does, is an act of resistance against a system that constantly tells you you're not enough. It's rebellious to tell yourself you're proud when the world expects you to live in comparison, competition, and self-doubt. Because congratulating yourself from time to time isn't just healthy. It's radically necessary. It's the only true way to remember who you are at your core, underneath all the expectations you've carried since childhood. After all, if you don't celebrate yourself, if you don't recognize your own quiet brilliance, You may spend your whole life waiting for applause that never comes, waiting for recognition that always feels too late. Today, you can stop and say, with sincerity, I'm here. I'm alive. I'm doing well. Not tomorrow. Not when you win an award. Not when others give you permission. Right now. Because life, with all its chaos, hardship, and beauty, deserves to be celebrated without conditions. Because in the instant you give yourself permission to applaud your own existence, something magical happens. Life itself starts clapping with you. In a corner of the world, where few ever look, something happened that's worth remembering. On the day Gabriel received the greatest award of his career, he understood something that would never appear on his resume. Life doesn't always reward what truly matters. He had worked half his life for that shiny statue he now held before hundreds of elegant people, smiling, dressed in their finest, eyes reflecting more ambition than joy. The theater lights bathed him like an artificial baptism, and the thunder of applause echoed in his chest like distant drums, warm on the surface, but cold underneath. There he stood, Gabriel, with the perfect suit, the perfect smile, and the perfect speech. He had rehearsed it 1,000 times in the bathroom mirrors of anonymous hotel rooms across foreign cities. He had practiced saying each word with just the right amount of emotion, with carefully crafted gestures that displayed humility, elegance, and gratitude. He knew exactly when to pause, when to fake the tear, when to look up toward the ceiling as if some angel backstage were giving divine approval. But what he hadn't rehearsed was the one thing he actually felt in that very moment. An unexpected, absolute, almost painful emptiness. A sensation that no fake smile could mask, no applause could fill. The very life that had taught him to chase awards had never taught him to feel proud of himself without needing them. Years ago, Gabriel had been a young dreamer, full of energy and that innate rebellion of those who believe they can escape an ordinary life. But the farther he climbed, the more applause he received, the more recognition he accumulated, the more something essential inside him began to fade. Every success, instead of making him feel more alive, left him more alone, more pressured, more hollow. When did it become so important to impress the world? When was the last time he did something just for himself, not for the eyes of others? There on stage, under the blinding lights, he finally realized the person he most needed praise from had never once given it, and that person was himself. And then he remembered the night before, in a tiny cafe just outside the Grand Theater, when a young woman, distracted, smiling, served him a cup of coffee. She had a small tattoo on her forearm that read, "Congratulations for still being here." That phrase, simple and almost unnoticeable, stopped him. It made him breathe differently. It made him wonder, for the first time in a long while, what he was really doing with his life. He didn't know if the tattoo was for her or if it was just a message someone, somewhere in the world, needed to hear at that exact moment. But Gabriel felt as if this stranger had spoken directly to his soul. The truth is, Gabriel had survived far too long without celebrating himself, chasing something that had no name or form but looked far too much like external approval. He had learned to chase applause like a drug that numbs but never heals. And so, each victory grew bitter. Each prize became another empty goal. Each achievement, just another rung on an invisible ladder to nowhere. Now on stage, looking at the gleaming trophy, he felt a strange certainty, disturbing, yet liberating. This wasn't the applause he needed. This wasn't what he had been chasing when he first began his journey. Somewhere along the way, he had gotten lost between the success that others cheer for and the quiet happiness that no one ever rewards. He remembered his early days, when painting was enough to make life feel meaningful, when a hot coffee at dawn, a blank canvas, and his favorite music made him feel completely alive. And now here he was, standing before a crowd that was celebrating something he could no longer recognize. Life, in its favorite ironic twist, was giving him his greatest applause at the exact moment he realized his deepest loneliness. And as he held the microphone, he knew he couldn't pretend anymore. He wouldn't say what he'd planned. He couldn't lie to the only audience that truly mattered, himself. He looked at the trophy with a smile that leaned heavily into sadness, brought the microphone to his lips, and spoke, not loudly, but with a strength that shook the room. "I accept this award not for everything I did right, but for everything I sacrificed in vain to earn it. Tonight, for the first time, I congratulate myself not for my success, but for still being here despite myself, not because of me. I hope one day, every person dares to celebrate themselves without waiting for anyone else's applause. Silence. Immediate and absolute. Gabriel stepped down from the stage, leaving the award on the podium, while everyone watched, confused, stunned, uncomfortable. But he was no longer there to explain himself. He walked toward the exit, toward the cool night waiting beyond the doors, feeling, maybe for the first time in years, something like peace. That night, Gabriel understood that life does not celebrate with medals or applause. Life celebrates with quiet honesty, with raw truth, with the simplest of revelations. And it doesn't matter how many ovations you receive, or how many people admire you. At the end of the day, when the theater empties, the only voice that remains is the one inside your soul. And that voice, more than any other, deserves to be heard, to be honored, to be celebrated. Because behind every round of applause you chase, there may be a loneliness too deep to name. But behind every quiet self-congratulation, there hides a joy no one can ever take from you. There are people who believe that celebrating life is a form of irresponsibility, an emotional excess best reserved for birthdays or for when things finally go right. People who live with the handbrake on, who never laugh fully, who never truly embrace, who don't allow themselves to enjoy the present because there's always something more urgent, more important, more productive to do. People who don't realize that if they don't celebrate themselves every once in a while, life slowly fills with a silent sadness that shows no symptoms, but decays everything from within. Do you know what's truly irresponsible? Letting existence become a chore. Letting the soul rust while waiting for the big moment. Postponing joy like it's dessert you have to earn. Turning routine into punishment and breathing into an obligation. There's something deeply flawed in the way we were taught to exist. We were educated for effort, but not for tenderness. For achievement, but not for gratitude. For merit, but not for the miracle. Because yes, life is a miracle. Not as a spiritual cliche or something you'd read on a coffee mug, but as a scientific and philosophical fact. Your heart has beaten millions of times since you were born, without you ever having to ask it to. Your body has endured sleepless nights, sorrow, poorly digested meals, doubtful decisions, hidden fears, and words never spoken. You've survived days when you didn't want to get up, but you did. You kept breathing even when everything hurt. And still you haven't applauded yourself. Still you keep demanding of yourself as if you were a machine without a soul. There is something in you that deserves to be celebrated every single day. Your ability to keep going, not to triumph, not to dazzle, not to have everything under control, just to keep going. Because in a world that pressures you to give up, to go numb, to become functional before human, staying alive and feeling something is a form of silent victory. That's why this chapter isn't a lesson, it's a reminder. We're not here to give you a method for celebrating life as if it were a recipe. We're here to tell you that you don't need one. That celebrating your existence isn't something you have to learn. It's something you allow. Something you remember. Something that gets reawakened in the little things. In the warmth of a coffee after a long shower. In a song that gives you goosebumps. In a walk where nothing happens, and yet something in you softens. Celebration is nothing more than that. Letting yourself feel that being here is already enough. Do you know when we realize we haven't celebrated ourselves enough? When the body starts to speak. When insomnia becomes chronic. When your back refuses to stop aching. When Sunday nights feel like punishment. When you need increasingly stronger stimuli just to feel something. When you realize that the applause you crave most is the one that never comes, your own. And no, it's not ego. It's not vanity. It's emotional sanity. It's spiritual intelligence. It's effective maturity. The act of applauding yourself from time to time is like watering a plant that hasn't bloomed in years because no one took the time to see it was still alive. That plant is you. And if you don't start watering it yourself, don't expect it to blossom under someone else's rain. Once, a middle-aged woman, whose name doesn't matter because it could easily be you, confessed something so simple and so revealing that it made an entire auditorium cry. She said, I spent my life fulfilling what everyone else expected of me, and when I finally achieved it all, I realized there was no one applauding, not even me. That phrase hung in the air like an unbearable truth, and also like a warning, because that's what happens when you postpone your own celebration. The silence eventually becomes intolerable, not because others don't recognize you, but because you stopped recognizing yourself. And without recognition, there are no roots. Without roots, there's no direction. And without direction, there's no life, just a calendar. Chapter 2. The criticism we inherited. Sometimes, just watching the way someone looks at themselves in the mirror is enough to understand everything they carry. There are those who examine their reflection like a crumbling property, searching for faults, cracks, structural flaws, a crooked eyebrow, a premature wrinkle, a gesture that condemns them. There are those who look at themselves with resignation, as if they'd lost a battle long ago that they never really understood. And then there are the few, the very few, who look at themselves with tenderness, with humor, with quiet gratitude, like someone who sees a work in progress, not a debt unpaid. But most people live under the whip of a voice they never chose, a voice that learned to punish from childhood, a voice that sounds exactly like mom, or dad, or a frustrated teacher, or that grandmother who believed loving you meant correcting you at every turn. That voice lives inside you now, and the most dangerous part is that it speaks in your tone, your accent, your breathing, so you think it's you. But it's not. It's an echo, an unclaimed emotional inheritance, an old recording no one bothered to erase. That voice scolds you for what you didn't do, for what you did too late, for what you could have done better, for what you did well but not gracefully enough, for what you achieved but still wasn't good enough. That voice doesn't celebrate. It doesn't acknowledge. It doesn't breathe with you. It only demands. It only points fingers. It only diminishes. And so, you wake up every day not to live, but to defend yourself. Not to explore, but to avoid disappointing yourself. Not to express, but to avoid making mistakes. And that is the cruelest kind of prison, because it's invisible. No bars. No visiting hours. Just pressure, anxiety, and that silent anguish that tightens in your chest for reasons you can't explain. Has it ever happened to you? You're washing dishes, or finishing an email, or walking through the supermarket, and suddenly something clenches inside. A discomfort you can't name. A sigh that won't leave. And it's because you've been speaking to yourself all day like a bitter HR manager, evaluating your emotional performance, rating your effective productivity. We've gotten used to speaking badly to ourselves, and that's more serious than it sounds. Because your mind hears everything you say, even the things you only think, and your body responds to those messages as if they were true. If you tell yourself every day that you're clumsy, your body starts to move with uncertainty. If you tell yourself you're always late, your nervous system starts bracing for failure. If you say you don't deserve to rest, your back begins to ache before it needs to. If you tell yourself you're not enough, your dreams begin to shrink before you even notice. This is the criticism we inherited, a voice that wasn't yours but now lives in you. It didn't arrive out of malice, it arrived by repetition. Because whoever raised you was also raised under pressure. Because your mother learned to mother through fear of failing. Because your father thought affection was weakness. Because your teachers confused education with correction. Because all of them, every one, dragged with them some form of emotional violence. Subtle, disguised as discipline, cloaked in good intentions, love without grace. And you, without realizing it, inherited that way of treating yourself. But the most unfair thing is this: that internal critic never updates. It doesn't matter how much you've grown, how much you've learned, how far you've come. It keeps reciting an old script, as if you were still that 10-year-old who got a word wrong and earned a look of disappointment. That critic has no sense of time, and that's why it hurts so much. And here is where the change begins, not from fake self-love, not from empty phrases like "love yourself more" that sound like titles from viral videos, but from the deep recognition that this voice is not you, that you can hear it without obeying it, that you can rewrite it without hating it, that you can look in the mirror and say, "I am not that critic. I am what remains when that critic finally falls silent." Reprogramming doesn't mean ignoring the pain. It means looking tenderly at the origin of your limitations and choosing not to repeat them. It's like realizing that the coat you've been wearing was never yours. You inherited it from someone else. And while it kept you warm for a time, now it's too small, too tight, too uncomfortable. It no longer serves you. It no longer fits. You thank it for being there, and then you let it go. That's how it is with your inner voice. You honor it. You release it. You replace it with another. Not with one that lies, but with one that knows how to love. A voice that says things like, I saw how hard you tried. This hurt, but you faced it. Today wasn't easy, but you kept going. You deserve to rest without guilt. You did well, even if no one noticed. That voice isn't naive. It's wise, because it knows that celebrating your effort doesn't make you weak. It makes you human. Because it knows that speaking to yourself with tenderness doesn't make you complacent. It makes you free. And do you know what the most revolutionary part is? You can choose your new voice. You can build it with words that heal you. You can give it humor, irony, poetry. You can speak to yourself the way you wish someone who truly loved you would speak. Not someone who judges from the outside, but someone who sees you from within, without fear, without an agenda, without a stopwatch. This isn't therapy. It's justice. It's the restoration of a broken bond with yourself. It's choosing to stop being a harsh judge and start being your own best defender. It's choosing not only what you say, but how you say it. Because your inner voice can be your cruelest jailer or your greatest ally. It can be a whip, or it can be a hug. And you decide. Not overnight, not in one day, but starting today. Let's keep talking about this. Let's keep dismantling that inherited criticism until it no longer scares you to look in the mirror. Until your inner voice sounds like applause, like a sigh, like a party unfolding quietly inside you that needs no permission to celebrate. Because you're alive. Because you're here. Because you're still going. And that, even if no one has told you yet, is already reason enough to start speaking to yourself differently. In a corner of the world where everything appeared normal, there lived a woman named Irene whose calendar was always full, not out of ambition, but out of habit. Each week was divided into tasks, goals, checklists. She worked diligently, cared for her ill mother, helped her children with homework, answered messages around the clock with machine-like precision, leaving no room for silence. Whenever she finished a project, she crossed it off without celebration. When praised, she smiled with a kind of defensive humility that looked more like fear than modesty. When someone tried to acknowledge her effort, she replied with a phrase repeated by millions like a tragic mantra. It's nothing. Until one day, her 12-year-old daughter wrote her a letter, handwritten in pencil with tight letters and tiny stars drawn in the margins. It read, Mom, when I grow up I want to be like you, but I also want you to be happy. You're always tired, and when I tell you that you do things well, you just say anyone would do it. But I don't know anyone who does everything you do. So, even if you don't say it, I will. You did great. Really. It's not a lie. I see you. I believe you. Irene read the letter in silence, her hands trembling, lips pressed shut. She didn't cry, not for lack of emotion, but out of habit. She had forgotten how. She had spent so many years in survival mode that her ability to accept love as something legitimate had atrophied. She didn't know what to do with a phrase like, I see you. Because she hadn't seen herself in decades. That's what happens when inherited criticism becomes the norm. You stop registering praise, scanning reality only for flaws. Praise feels suspicious. Self-worth feels arrogant. We learn to dim our light, so we wouldn't make others uncomfortable. To not shine too brightly in case someone else felt overshadowed. To tone down our joy, so we wouldn't seem excessive. And so, we build a life where the only applause we allow ourselves is the one meant for others. Never our own. Never the quiet kind. Never the kind we actually deserve. Yayoi Kusama, the Japanese artist whose mind wanders through worlds where many would get lost, spent years living voluntarily in a psychiatric hospital. From there, she obsessively painted her dots, her spirals, her endless patterns. She said that if she didn't paint, she would die. And still, The art world ignored her for decades. Until one day, someone truly saw her. Not out of pity, but because her universe held more truth than the museums. And when she finally began to receive recognition, Kusama didn't apologize. She didn't look down. She didn't say it's nothing. She just painted more, created more, exploded her own existence with the freedom of someone who doesn't need approval, but doesn't reject it either. That's what we forget. Celebrating yourself isn't vanity, it's resistance. Saying, "I did well," doesn't make you self-centered. It makes you aware. Accepting a compliment doesn't mean you're narcissistic. It means your self-esteem is working. Not celebrating yourself is what's abnormal. Not recognizing your own worth is the true illness. Denying yourself the chance to shine a little each day is like living underground, hoping the sun will find you through intuition. But all is not lost. You can unlearn the shame of being praised. You can retrain your inner gaze. You can learn to say, "Thank you for what you did today," without irony. The first step is to name that critical voice. Identify it. Call it out. Name it for what it is. The demanding great-grandmother, the frustrated coach, the ex who made you feel small, the boss who only spoke up when something went wrong. That voice has a name and a history. It's not you. You are the one listening. And that means you can change the channel. The next step is to practice accepting praise without guilt. Start small. Say to yourself, without witnesses, "I was brilliant in that meeting. Today I was patient when I could have screamed. Today, I didn't forget myself." At first, it sounds fake. Then it starts to sound familiar. And one day it sounds like you. Not the version that was raised, but the one that was born with you. Do you know why so many people fall into toxic relationships, thankless jobs, draining friendships? Because they're trained not to receive appreciation. Because any form of love that isn't disguised as demand feels fake. Because they believe praise is a trap. And that's the saddest part. The culture of self-criticism has raised entire generations incapable of saying, "I'm proud of myself," without feeling ashamed. We were told ego is bad, but no one taught us the difference between ego and self-love. We confused validation with arrogance. And in that confusion, we stayed waiting for applause that never came, because we silenced our own hands. But celebrating doesn't mean shouting your achievements from rooftops. It means honoring them. It means giving yourself a quiet, sacred space to remember that not everything is about duty, that there's also the gift, the gesture, the presence, that you can make peace with your path, even if it's imperfect, that you can applaud yourself, even if no one else does. Next time someone tells you, "You did great," don't rush to downplay it. Stay, breathe, receive it. Don't explain why it's not a big deal. Don't throw the compliment back like it's burning you. Thank them. Own it. And if you can, add it to your secret collection of invisible victories. Because that's where inner dignity comes from. Quiet acts that don't make noise, but grow deep roots. And if you won't do it for yourself, then do it for the part of you that's still waiting for someone to say, "I see you. I believe you. You did well." That part that's still alive, even if it's hard to tell. That part that wants to dance in the kitchen for no reason. That part that smiles when no one's watching. That part that already deserves to be celebrated, without permission, without excuses, without fear. Because forgotten praise isn't gone, it's just asleep. And you today, you can wake it up. There are days when joy feels like a foreign language, a tongue you once spoke as a child, but have forgotten from lack of use, lack of permission. Not because life didn't give you reasons, but because you stopped feeling worthy of them. You stopped celebrating the little things, as if they didn't count. You stopped getting excited over finishing something hard, over waking up without pain, over walking with music in your ears, not knowing exactly where you were headed. Because someone somewhere convinced you that celebrating without a grand reason was childish, selfish, or unnecessary. And like all of us, you believed them. ChatGPT plus. But if you pay close attention, you'll see that the most memorable moments of your life didn't come with fireworks. Most of them felt like a song playing softly in the background while you were busy doing something else. Like an unexpected smell awakening a memory you didn't know was still inside you. Real happiness is just that, quiet, familiar, soft. And that's why it's so hard to recognize. Have you noticed how we live as if happiness were an event? Something that happens after finishing something. Something you have to earn. Something you have to justify. As if celebrating for the sake of it were a sign of immaturity. As if laughing to yourself in line at the bank were suspicious. As if jumping up and down in your kitchen because a recipe turned out well were ridiculous. And yet, those are the very things we miss the most when we can no longer do them. No one on their deathbed regrets not having been more serious. What people regret the most is not having allowed themselves to feel more, to play more, to celebrate, to improvise, not having danced more without a reason. In the neighborhood where Joaquin grew up, there was a man named Lucio who became famous for something rather unusual. Every day, at the same hour, Lucio would go out for a walk with his cat, but he didn't carry the cat in his arms or on a leash. He took him out in a little wooden cart he had built himself. A small cart with cushions, a tiny umbrella, and even a little horn he used to greet the neighbors. At first, everyone thought he was crazy. Then they started waiting for him. Lucio would wave with a crooked smile, unhurried, while the cat looked out at the world like it belonged to him. One day, a local journalist came to interview him. She asked why he did it. Lucio replied, "Because it makes me happy. Because after losing my wife, my dog, and my job, I realized life had gotten so strange that I either found a way to laugh or I'd die inside. And I chose to laugh. The cat's happy. I'm happy. That's enough." That story, which went around the internet for a while and then faded away like everything essential, holds a secret that few understand. Joy isn't naive. It's a survival strategy, one of the most powerful there is. Only no one ever taught you that. They taught you that joy must be proportional to your achievements, that you have to earn it, that it's suspicious if it comes uninvited, that you have to justify it like someone explaining why they missed work, as if enjoying yourself were dangerous, as if smiling too much were sinful. And it's not your fault. We live in a culture that confuses depth with sadness, that values worry over peace, that romanticizes exhaustion, stress, and overproductivity. But what about the small celebrations? Where are the private parties that need no guests or loud music? Just the quiet certainty that, for some unknown reason, today is a good day to be alive. Roberto Benigni, that actor and director who made the world cry while speaking of life as if it were a sacred game, once said that joy is not a luxury, it's a spiritual necessity, that humor is a form of resistance, that laughing when everything seems to be going wrong is an act of daily heroism. When he accepted the Oscar for Life is Beautiful, instead of giving a solemn speech, he jumped over the theater chairs. Literally, people applauded him like he had resurrected something dormant in everyone, the permission to not be ashamed of being happy. That's the new way of celebrating yourself, without asking permission, without worrying about seeming too enthusiastic, without being afraid of looking ridiculous. Because when lived fully, the ridiculous becomes a form of art. And because celebrating the little things doesn't mean ignoring the big ones. It means honoring the journey. It means building an altar to the ordinary. It means not waiting for something extraordinary to happen in order to realize that it already is. Joy is not a goal. It's a way of walking the path. And it can be trained, cultivated, chosen, like someone deciding what to wear on a gray day, like someone putting on a cheerful song while sweeping the house, even if things aren't okay inside. Not to deny the sadness, but to keep it from moving impermanently. And if celebrating feels too hard, start small. Celebrate a well-written email. Celebrate a day without anxiety. Celebrate finally saying no to something you didn't want to do. Celebrate wearing your favorite outfit on a random Tuesday. Celebrate not yelling at yourself when you made a mistake. Celebrate that you can still hear music, and that somewhere inside you, something still moves. Because that's life, too. And if you don't celebrate it, no one else will do it for you. You're not here just to survive. You're here to remember that breathing, feeling, creating, messing up, loving, and starting over are all perfect forms of celebration. And every time you choose to laugh at yourself, dance alone, or say out loud, "This feels good," you're making a pact with the brightest part of yourself, the part that knows the soul isn't fed by achievements alone, but by those tiny, Holy moments when you let yourself be happy without needing a reason. And if you ever doubt it, if you ever think celebrating small things is too much, remember Lucio, pushing his cat in a wooden cart, waving to the world without explaining himself. Because maybe it's not about doing grand things, but about doing small things with such honest joy that it breaks every rule sadness tried to impose. There's a question no one asked you as a child, but maybe it could have changed your whole life if someone had. It's not, what do you want to be when you grow up? It's simpler, more vital, more urgent. It's this: how do you speak to yourself when no one is listening? Because right there, in that exact space, is where most of your emotional future gets shaped. Not in your resume, not in your grades, not in your visible accomplishments, but in the tone with which you talk to yourself every day. Every time you mess up, every time you doubt, every time you're alone with your thoughts and, without realizing it, become either your worst judge or your greatest ally. But most of us grew up with a voice we didn't choose. A borrowed voice. A voice that doesn't guide, it interrogates. That doesn't accompany, it punishes. A voice that asks, "Why did you do that?" instead of "How did it feel?" A voice that says, "It's about time," instead of "You did it." A voice that mutters, "You could have done better," even when you've already done more than enough. That voice, the one we inherited without knowing, isn't just critical. It's a subconscious replay of an old story. A story that no longer belongs to you, but that you still live as if it did. Maya Angelou, the writer who turned every wound into medicine, once said, "People will forget what you said. They'll forget what you did, but they'll never forget how you made them feel." The same holds true inwardly. Your body never forgets how you made it feel each time you ignored it, each time you didn't celebrate it, each time you failed to defend it. Your soul doesn't forget the times you treated yourself with contempt, when you pushed yourself without compassion, when you compared yourself to impossible versions. It doesn't forget because your inner voice holds more power than any external opinion ever could. And yet, we keep giving more weight to how others see us than to the conversation we're having inside, as if outside validation could somehow heal the emotional dislocation we carry within, as if a round of public applause could make up for the years of inner silence. But it can't. No amount of external recognition can mend a self-worth built upon relentless self-criticism. Something radical needs to happen. We need to change the tone. Not just the words. The tone. It's not enough to tell yourself, "I'm enough," if you say it through clenched teeth. It won't work to say, "I value myself," if you sound like you're swallowing something bitter. You have to speak to yourself the way someone who truly loves you would. And that, my friend, is an art. Picture this. A ridiculous but real scene. A man in his 40s trips and falls on the sidewalk coming out of a bank. Papers flying everywhere. Knees scraping the concrete. No blood, just shattered dignity. He gets up quickly, brushes himself off, pretends it didn't happen. But inside, the critic is already awake. What an idiot. How didn't you see that edge? You're a mess. And it all happens in seconds. No one insulted him. No one laughed. Every word came from inside. Like an automatic wave of contempt, no audience required. Now imagine the same scene, but with a different voice. One that says, "Hey, easy. It was just a trip. No big deal. Everyone falls. What matters is, you got up gracefully." That voice doesn't deny the mistake. It humanizes it. And that's the key. It's not about lying to yourself. It's about refusing to condemn yourself for being human. Because if you don't learn to speak to yourself with tenderness in your moments of failure, you'll live a half-life, always waiting for someone to rescue you, when the real rescue begins with how you name yourself, with how you allow yourself to exist without conditions, with how you turn your gaze inward and build a space of dignity instead of judgment. There are people who speak more kindly to their dog than to themselves, who show more patience to a stranger in the supermarket line than to their own reflection in the mirror, who defend a friend from criticism more fiercely than they defend their own soul from their own voice. How did we get here? When did we decide we deserved so little? The answer is simple. No one taught us to speak to ourselves well. Growing up meant correcting, not recognizing. We confused discipline with punishment. We were made to believe that loving yourself made you weak, and that's done a lot of harm. but it's not irreversible. How do we change it? With emotional training, with intention, with practice, like learning a new language, like retraining a trembling hand to write again. Start with one phrase a day. Write it down. Whisper it. Say it, even if it feels silly. Phrases like, I deserve tenderness. I'm learning to treat myself better. I did the best I could today, and that's enough. It'll feel strange at first. Then, it starts to sound familiar. One day, it feels like you. Not the version of you that was raised. The version that was born with you. And if you need help, create a character. Give a voice to a version of yourself that's wise, compassionate, funny. A kind of spiritual grandmother who speaks with an accent, tells jokes, maybe even holds an imaginary cup of tea. And every time your inner critic flares up, let her speak instead. Let her defend you. Let her celebrate you. Let her wrap her arms around you from the inside. Because that voice, that warmth, is also you. It was just asleep. We're not here to be perfect. We're here to be real. And realness needs room for mistakes, for laughter in the wrong moments, for unexpected tears, for long pauses. Above all, it needs an inner voice that isn't a machine gun of demands, but a fire where you can warm yourself on cold days. Speaking kindly to yourself isn't a luxury. It's a survival skill. It's mental hygiene. It's applied spirituality. It's a political act. Because in a world that profits from self-loathing, loving yourself without guilt is the highest form of rebellion. And if you don't start that revolution within, who will? There's a moment. It has no fixed hour when you finally get tired. Not of the world. Not of others. Of yourself. Of the way you speak to yourself. Of always telling yourself you're not enough. Of minimizing everything you do. Of living defensively with your own voice. Of every accomplishment being followed by a correction. Of every smile dissolving too quickly because the guilt follows. The it wasn't that great. The about time. The yes, but you get tired. And that fatigue is sacred because it marks the beginning of change. One day, without knowing how, without planning it, without ceremony, something shifts inside you. Instead of saying you're so dumb, you say, you're tired and you still showed up. Instead of calling yourself lazy, you say, you needed to stop. Instead of saying, not this again, you say, this part of me deserves love too. And in that moment, though it might seem small, though it won't sound heroic, you've just disarmed a pattern that ruled you for decades. Speaking to yourself with kindness isn't about mantras or perfect catchphrases. It's about honesty, about respect, about a new tenderness, one that doesn't seek drama or external applause. A quiet tenderness that begins to whisper inside you and, without realizing it, starts rewriting everything. And yes, it's not immediate. Sometimes, speaking kindly to yourself feels like using a foreign language. At first, it sounds awkward. Then it becomes necessary. Later, it turns natural. And one day, it becomes inevitable. One day, without even noticing, you'll stop tolerating the old voice. You won't allow it to live rent-free in your mind anymore. You won't accept that inherited criticism still governs your self-worth. Like a dictator, no one dares to question. That day comes. And when it does, you won't need the world's applause. Because you'll feel it. Because you'll know it. Because, finally, you'll recognize yourself. And it's there, precisely there, that true celebration begins. Not the kind with balloons or likes. The kind that happens when you quietly say to yourself, thanks for staying. You did well, even if it wasn't perfect. You're learning, and that's enough. Inner celebration is a silent but deep applause. One that doesn't echo with clapping hands, but with an open chest. One that needs no witnesses, because it happens in the most intimate place of all, your own consciousness. And that, dear brother of light, is what the world needs most right now. Not more brilliant people who are empty inside. Not more hollow achievements built on broken spirits. Not more milestones reached at the expense of your tenderness. What the world truly needs is people who celebrate themselves from within, who embrace themselves without excuses, who can say, I am enough, without looking around for validation. People who understand that treating themselves with love is not weakness, it's emotional mastery. You weren't born to be a fixer of flaws. You were born to create, to breathe with grace, to laugh at what once made you cry, to look back without shame, to name yourself with words that heal, not punish, to be a shelter, not a sentence, to be light in your own darkness. Self-criticism can be useful, but without self-compassion, it becomes torture. Personal growth without celebration is nothing but slavery disguised as progress, and improvement without gratitude turns into obsession. So stop, breathe, look at yourself with calm, not from the character you play, from the being you are, and say something you may have never said before, not with irony, not with sarcasm, not in self-defense. I'm proud of myself. Even if no one else says it, even if no one understands it, because this path you're walking every day, with everything it costs, with everything it demands, with everything you're healing, deserves a kind of recognition that cannot be outsourced. Do it, right now. Say it with the voice you're learning to use, with the new voice, with your voice, not the one you inherited. And if you do it, if you say it, if you believe it, even if just a little, even if just for a few seconds, you've just done the bravest thing a human being can do in these times, to celebrate yourself without applause, to congratulate yourself without permission, to name yourself with dignity. And that, in this world, is a revolution. And you, right now, have just lit the flame. Chapter 3. The Art of Still Dancing When the Music's Already Stopped. It's not hard to celebrate when life smiles at you, when everything goes your way, when the applause is loud and the lights are on. Anyone can raise a glass at a party. Anyone can laugh when nothing hurts. But there's an older art, a deeper and more sacred one. The art of still dancing when the music has stopped, when the chairs are empty, when the floor is dirty and all that remains is the echo of a song no one else can hear. That moment when you find yourself still moving in the middle of silence, with no witnesses, no validation, no need to explain why you're still standing. That moment, brother, is more than survival. It is wisdom. There's a kind of joy that doesn't shout, one that doesn't seek to be understood, one that needs no stage. It's the joy of someone who's been broken many times and has chosen to rebuild without drama, without speeches, simply because they've understood that being alive isn't a triumph. It's a daily decision, and to celebrate it is an act of lucid resistance, an exercise in emotional dignity, a gesture of radical love toward oneself and toward everything that exists. There are people who dance at weddings, and there are others who learn to dance at funerals, not out of irreverence, but because they've realized that death doesn't cancel life, that sorrow doesn't erase beauty, that silence isn't the end of music. It's the beginning of a new choreography within. It's not cynicism. It's awareness. It's looking into the abyss and, instead of surrendering, letting out a laugh, like someone who owes nothing to the world's solemnity, but still owes tenderness to their own soul. When Viktor Frankl wrote Man's Search for Meaning, it wasn't from a countryside retreat or a bright office basking in success. It was after surviving the horrors of Auschwitz, after losing his family, after losing everything but his humanity. And from that place, he said something unforgettable. He who has a why to live can bear almost anyhow. But sometimes that why isn't a cause, a dream, or some transcendent goal. Sometimes that why is a laugh in the middle of a disaster. It's an old song playing on the radio while you wash the dishes. It's a shared look with someone who's also holding the world together. It's dancing alone in the kitchen just because you don't need a reason, because life itself is already enough of an excuse. But of course, no one teaches you that. You have to discover it. And to discover it, sometimes you have to lose everything, or almost everything. You have to let the masks fall, the roles, the titles, the applause. You have to sit in silence with yourself and ask, am I still here? And if the answer is yes, then you already have your first reason to dance. Not because everything's fine, but because you didn't let the bad steal your soul. Sometimes the music you need doesn't come from outside. It's not in a concert, or a party, or a compliment. Sometimes it comes from a part of you that refuses to die. A part that whispers, we're not done yet. A part that still believes in beauty even if no one talks about it anymore. That music has no melody, but it has rhythm. The rhythm of your breathing, of your awkward but brave steps, of your thoughts that finally stopped hitting you and began to hold you. That's the new dance. The one that can't be seen, but can be felt. The one that needs no spectators, because it's so intimate only you can dance it. I remember Natalia's story, a woman who spent over 20 years caring for her mother with Alzheimer's. She gave up her career, her travels, so many of her own needs. And when her mother passed away, she didn't cry right away. She went out for a walk, alone, in the early morning. She walked through the empty streets of her neighborhood, feeling the cold air, the thick silence, the weight of everything she had lived through. And when she reached a small park, she sat on a bench and started to sing. Not a sad song, a children's song, one she was sung as a little girl. She sang it softly, like a prayer. Then she stood up and danced. Not much, just a few clumsy steps. But she danced, without music, without explanation, without anyone watching, because she knew that if she didn't dance that day, she might not be able to go on, because she understood that sometimes you have to dance so you don't turn a stone. That gesture, small, invisible, was her way of honoring the pain without letting it consume her. It was her way of saying, I'm alive, even though it hurts. And that, brother, is the most powerful way to celebrate life. Not from perfection, but from authenticity. Not from euphoria, but from presence. The last chapter of any story shouldn't be a closing. It should be an expansion. A flame that doesn't go out, but lights others. This chapter we're writing now isn't here to resolve anything. It's here to remind you of something you've always known, but forgot amid the noise. That your joy doesn't need permission. That your peace isn't up for negotiation. That your way of celebrating doesn't require an audience. That your dance can begin even if no one's watching. And if you still have doubts, if you think it's too late to learn how to celebrate, if you feel like the music has stopped, close your eyes, take a deep breath, and listen. There it is. That heartbeat, that rhythm, that secret melody only you can follow. It doesn't come from Spotify or the loudspeakers of the world. It comes from you. And as long as it's playing, even if it's faint, even if it's just a single note, even if it's only a whisper, you have permission to dance. Because if the world stands still, but you're still moving inside, then the music hasn't ended yet. There are people who believe life is measured by achievements, by titles, by productive days. People who write everything down in goal-setting journals, who celebrate only when something big happens, who postpone happiness as if it were a bill to be paid. But there are others, fewer and fewer, who understand something different, something that doesn't fit on a performance chart or in a motivational speech. They understand that life is not about arriving, but about knowing how to be, and that some celebrations don't need to be announced because they happen in silence, in the shadows, in that sacred place where no one applauds, but the soul gives thanks. Learning to celebrate without a reason is a kind of wisdom few dare to practice, because it means accepting that you don't need external validation to feel good, that you don't need a monumental victory to gift yourself a break, a walk with no destination, a glass of wine under soft light, a laugh that makes no sense. And that, in today's world, sounds almost rebellious, because we were taught to delay joy, to treat it like a reward at the end of sacrifice, as if living well for no reason were an immoral luxury. But the truth is, not celebrating life has a cost we pay in anxiety, in chronic dissatisfaction, in the pains the body stores when the soul forgets how to rejoice. Have you noticed how children celebrate everything? Finishing a drawing, finding a strange-looking rock, eating something delicious, simply being alive. They clap, they jump, they laugh, as if the whole world were a show made just for them. And it's not that they're naive. It's that they haven't yet forgotten that the simple act of existing is already a party. But then they grow up, and someone tells them that's not how it's done. That happiness must be earned, that you can't just go around smiling without a good reason. So, little by little, they learn to put joy away for special occasions, as if life were a banquet hall instead of an improvised carnival. Carlos Castaneda, in his conversations with Don Juan, learned a disconcerting truth. You must live as if death were always over your left shoulder. Not to frighten you, but to remind you that any moment could be your last. And not with drama, but with clarity. Because the one who remembers that everything could disappear at any time learns to dance lighter, to laugh without filters, to look at others with less judgment. The awareness of impermanence doesn't extinguish you. It sets you on fire. Death isn't the enemy of joy, it's its greatest ally, because it gives joy context, urgency, and presence. And then one day, without anything extraordinary happening, you finally understand. You understand that your best way to honor life is not by achieving more, correcting more, demanding more. Your best way to honor life is to dance it. Clumsily, gracefully, awkwardly if you must, but dance it, because the body also carries memory, and it needs to release, to move, to shake off the fears and silences. Dancing is not just an activity, it's a stance toward existence. It's telling pain it doesn't get the final word. It's telling sadness it can stay, but it won't be in charge. It's reminding yourself that the soul has legs, and that sometimes, to heal, you have to move them. I remember Inés, a woman who survived a devastating breakup, the kind that leave your house empty and your heart in ruins. She was left alone in an apartment that still smelled of someone who was no longer there. The first month, she cried every night. The second, she stopped crying, but also stopped speaking. The third, she forced herself to go for walks. And in the fourth month, on a random Tuesday while cleaning the kitchen, an old song played on her phone. She didn't think. She didn't hesitate. She didn't analyze. She just danced. Right there, hands covered in soap, eyes misty. She danced without music because really, she was dancing with the idea of coming back to herself. And that was the beginning. Not of a new love story. Not of an inspiring business venture. Not of a movie-worthy transformation. It was the beginning of a new intimacy with herself. Inés understood that she didn't have to be fine to move. That she didn't need to be healed to smile. That she could begin to feel alive before anything made sense. Because here's what no one tells you. Meaning often comes after the celebration, not before. And many times, it's unjustified joy that opens the door to understanding, not the other way around. So when someone asks why you're so cheerful, so at peace, so light, don't justify it. Don't say, because everything's going well. Don't explain. Just say, because I'm still here. Because I am. And if they don't understand, that's okay. Not everyone knows what it costs to keep going. Not everyone has learned the art of celebrating without an audience. And if you're already learning it, then you hold a treasure. One that can't be bought or taught. It's practiced. It's danced. It's laughed. It's honored in the ordinary. It's lived with the strange calm of someone who no longer needs the world to confirm anything, because they've already understood that being alive is enough, and that even joy unshared still counts, if you offer it to yourself. So keep going. Don't stop, even if no one's clapping, even if the dance floor is empty, even if the music has changed. Keep dancing with what you are, with what you have, with what hurts you and what saves you, because that sister, brother of light, is the truest rhythm of all, the one that doesn't need music, because it comes from within. There are days when you don't dance with your body, but with your thoughts. Days when the world feels heavy, and yet something inside you keeps moving. Like a quiet vibration, like a small ember refusing to die out, like a voice without words that says, keep going. Not because everything's fine, but because if you don't, the soul begins to go cold. And when the soul goes cold, it turns into logic, into calendar, into clock, and stops beating. Most people live in that state, surviving their calendar. And when you ask how they're doing, they give you a kind of emotional weather report. Hanging in there. Getting by. Doing what I can. And yes, that's true. We're all doing what we can. But the more important question is this: how are you doing it? Because the how is what defines whether you're truly living or just getting through. The how is the soul's language. It's what doesn't get said with words, but shows in the way you look, the way you breathe, the way you hold a cup or greet someone without realizing it. The how is your invisible dance. Eric from Once wrote, mature love says, I need you because I love you, and not the other way around. Something similar happens with true joy. Mature joy says, I celebrate myself because I exist, not because I have a reason. That's the difference between living conditionally and living in freedom, between dancing out of reaction and dancing by choice. Whoever learns this no longer needs everything to be perfect. They don't need outside music. They just need not to betray themselves. But getting there takes courage. The courage to abandon the logic of worthiness we were taught as children. That cruel idea that you're only allowed to feel good if you did everything right. That emotional doctrine that rewards pressure and punishes tenderness. That absurd belief that there's only a party if there's success, only dancing if there's applause, only joy if there's validation. So what happens to the gray days? The internal defeats? The efforts no one sees? The battles you lose in silence? Don't they deserve some gesture of celebration too? They deserve it more than anything. Because if you can dance after failure, you're no longer vulnerable. Because if you can laugh when things fall apart, you're no longer dependent. Because if you can say, "I love you," to yourself in the middle of chaos, then you are already free. Neil Donald Walsh wrote in Conversations with God that life is not a process of discovery. It is a process of creation. And that phrase is more than spiritual. It's psychologically brilliant. Because you didn't come here to find yourself. You came to invent yourself, to decide who you want to be. And one of the most powerful decisions you can make is this. Celebrating myself for no reason is an act of inner creation. I'm building a new way of being in the world. One where I don't need something to happen to feel grateful. One where I don't wait for the finish line to smile. One where the process is not just a means, it's the dance itself. And yes, sometimes it hurts. Sometimes you're right in the middle of the process, and nothing makes sense. Nothing feels clear. Everything feels unfinished. But even then, you can still dance. Because chaos also has a rhythm. Because pain can also move the body. Because sadness can become a new choreography if you let it move through you instead of break you. There's a scene in the Tibetan book of living and dying where a master is described smiling as he dies. Not because he wasn't afraid, but because he had learned to make every moment a quiet celebration, even the last one. And that teaching isn't about denying pain. It's about realizing that awareness expands most when we stop filling it with complaints and start filling it with presence, with gratitude, with inner music that doesn't go silent even when everything around us seems to be ending. And you, reading these words, feeling something shift inside, you have that same power. You don't have to die to learn it. You just have to decide that from now on, every act of self-love is a dance, every moment of silence an inner ovation, every mistake an unexpected pirouette, every weariness a slow step, and every glance in the mirror a new song. Because if you don't choose how to celebrate yourself, someone else will choose how to punish you. And they'll do it with formulas, with checklists, with empty goals, with other people's standards. And you'll forget yourself all over again. But not anymore. Because now you know. Now you can. Now you dance. Not always in rhythm, not always with energy, but always with soul. And that, in this age, is a form of revolution. And you're practicing it. Not on a stage, not under the lights, but right here, in this moment, with this truth. The music may stop, but you don't. Because the real melody, the one that holds everything together, is already playing inside you. And no one else can dance it the way you do. In a corner of the world where everything seemed normal, but everything was burning on the inside, lived Andrea. 39 years old, single mother, 2 kids, a job she didn't like, but that barely paid enough to reach the 20th of the month. She had a withered plant on the windowsill, 2 chipped teeth she was too ashamed to fix, and a body she had trained herself not to look at. She wasn't unhappy, she was a survivor. And these days, that's almost a sacred category. Andrea didn't have time for celebrations. Her life was a to-do list, a routine with no applause, a series of gray days she faced with dignity, and a biting sense of humor that saved her more than any therapy could. One random Thursday, when she thought nothing would ever change, the thing happened that no one plans for but everyone dreads. At 3 in the afternoon, in the middle of a Zoom meeting, her boss interrupted her with a voice already heavy with sentence. "Thanks for everything, Andrea. We won't be renewing your contract." Just like that. No drama. No hug. No words. They didn't even bother turning off their cameras. Andrea sat there, still, staring at the screen, while her own reflection stared back at her. A woman who didn't know whether to scream, cry, or just keep sitting there. She didn't say a word. She closed the laptop, walked to the kitchen, washed a dish, looked at her hands, felt the rage rise up her throat like a silent serpent. Then she went to the bathroom, locked the door, and finally cried. Not for the job, not for the paycheck, for the humiliation, for the powerlessness, for the years spent holding back, for having silenced herself for so long, for having put herself last, for never having celebrated herself. That night, once the children were asleep, Andrea pulled an old box from the closet. She opened it like someone opening a wound. Inside were photos of herself at 20, a notebook filled with clumsy poems, movie tickets, a letter she never sent, and at the bottom, a red dress, the same dress she wore the last time she felt beautiful. It was at a university party. She danced until fear vanished. She laughed with her whole mouth. She felt invincible. She couldn't remember the exact date, but she remembered the feeling. She had kept it as proof that she had once been someone else. That night, Andrea showered, combed her hair, put on that dress, poured herself a cheap glass of wine, turned on the speaker, and played a song she hadn't heard in years. And then she danced. Alone. In her living room. With her eyes closed. She danced as if someone were waiting for her at the end of the hallway. She danced as if being laid off had been permission. As if she finally understood that losing wasn't failing. It was being set free. As if, for the first time in a very long time, she allowed herself to live without asking for permission. She danced offbeat, but with soul. And at one point she laughed. Not from happiness, but from revelation. That kind of laughter that bubbles up when you realize you didn't break. That you wanted to break, but somehow you couldn't. Because something in you had already started to celebrate. No one saw that moment. She didn't post it online. She didn't write it in a journal. She didn't tell anyone. But that night, Andrea understood that her body needed to move. Not to forget, but to remember. That her joy wasn't a reward. It was a right. That there was nothing to wait for to celebrate herself. That life doesn't ask for reasons, only for presence. And that if you're alive, if you can still breathe with a hint of grace, then the music is already playing inside you. Andrea's story isn't unique. It's yours. It belongs to millions. It's the story of those who don't make headlines, but carry the world every day without letting it fall. The ones who don't have time for long cries, but find seconds to smile without needing a reason. The ones who don't see themselves as heroes, but they are, because they get back up, because they keep going, because even when no one celebrates them, they keep dancing among the dirty dishes. Congratulating yourself in these times isn't vanity, it's urgent. It's mental hygiene. It's the most subversive thing someone trained to postpone themselves can do. It's looking in the mirror without judgment and saying, I'm still here, and that's enough. It's understanding you don't need titles, successes, or validation to toast to yourself. That you can, like Andrea, put on an old song and dance with tearful eyes and still be celebrating life in a way no guru could teach you. Because the most important dance is not the one you do when everything is going well. It's the one you do when no one expects you to dance. When the easiest thing would be to give up. When the right thing would be to sit still. When the logical response would be to complain. And yet, you choose something else. You choose movement, inner music, the dignity of joy. And that, brothers and sisters of light, that is the revolution. The most peaceful, the most beautiful, the most powerful, the one that happens in your living room, without an audience, without a stage, without filters. Just you and that song no one else can hear, but that reminds you you're still alive. And now that you've walked with us, that you've breathed every word, that you've opened yourself to the mirror and felt seen from within, we've reached the end. But this isn't a closing. It's an opening. What you're about to do isn't finish a book. It's release the last anchor you were still holding. Not to escape, to fly, not to run, to inhabit your life with more beauty than before, with more rhythm, more poetry, more awareness, more of you. Because if there's one thing we've wanted to remind you in these pages, it's not that something's missing. It's that you've always had it. You always did. You just hadn't said it out loud yet. You convinced yourself you had to get somewhere before you earned the right to celebrate. But the celebration isn't at the end. The celebration is you, when you stop asking for permission to feel. Joy is not the destination, it's the tool. Not the reward, it's the path. Not the happy ending. It's the way you choose to narrate your days. As if they were art. As if your biography were a novel worthy of applause, even in the grayest chapters. Because yes, even pain deserves to be celebrated, not as decoration, but as revelation. Philosophy can teach you how to think. Psychology, how to behave. Spirituality, how to let go. But none of them will be enough if you don't learn something even more human, more real, more urgent. To celebrate yourself in a whisper while the world screams. To raise a glass to yourself when no one applauds you. To honor your little deaths and your tiny rebirths. To dance while carrying your children. To laugh while waiting in line at the bank. To smile at yourself while crying in the bathroom. To honor your humanity without needing a show. Because you are that. A survivor of yourself. A soul that has lived more than it tells. And even so, it hasn't gone out. That's why you're here. Not because you were looking for a formula, but because something inside you already knew what this book came to remind you. Your joy is sacred, and you can't keep leaving it for later. And you already know. Here at Let There Be Light, we'll keep lighting fires with you, so that in your silences, lanterns ignite to guide you through your inner journey. We'll meet again on the next path. We'll see you in the next video.